an interesting question, and the whole idea behind our product, which is a platform for asset managers, was this whole asset management sector was changing and changing in a big way. So we heard here there's this the liquids, the illiquids, and there's a whole rise in the illiquid side of the market. And within those markets, there are so many subsectors that start happening, and that is where we are focusing on, and we are creating technologies that will solve some of the challenges. So exactly what Safa was saying, that you're not using technology for the sake of creating technology. You are solving a real world problem where when asset managers need to allocate capital, and then they need to make sure that where they are allocating is right. That's where technology plays an important part. And that's the kind of platform that we are creating. Can you go to the next slide? I just wanted to give an overall idea of how big some of these markets are. And sometimes it's difficult to even comprehend how big it is. Just in 2003, the whole global asset management was about $31 trillion. Today, it's close to 103, actually, it's closing into $110 trillion. That is actually twice the size of the US economy. So this is a very, very large sector. And there's enormous amount of capital that flows in across different, if we cut it in many different ways, there's enormous amount of capital that flows in. And I think, Stephen, you were mentioning something about when you started, how big that market was. Do you want to mention those? Those are very interesting stats.
Just quickly, I started at Dreyfus Mutual Fund Company in 1981. The mutual fund market in the US was $130 billion at the time. Vanguard had 13, Fidelity had 12, and we had 11 at Dreyfus. So it's come a long way since then. As you know, BlackRock's about 10 trillion today. So it's been a lot of change.
There is a lot of change. And can you go to the next slide? So, and I have sliced this at a very high level, but we have the traditional investing, the public equities, the bonds, and some of those. But then there is a whole class of investments that are coming up. Private equity, obviously, everybody knows. Venture capital, most people know. But there is a whole other set of investments that are happening globally in an organized fashion, organized portfolio. Organized asset managers are doing this. And we see the effect of that in the overall structure of how much each of those has changed the markets. If you look just at the alternatives, they grew from less than a couple of percentage points to over 15% in just the last 20 years. So this is a very large growth. And this is probably alternatives and passive are the two biggest drivers of growth across the alternatives market. So if you go to the next slide. And what does that mean for change, and why are we, in fact, the question always is, why are we developing our platforms at this point of time? So if we go back, and this is when Stephen was working his magic early in his career. There was a whole infrastructure that had been developed. There were the investment services, there were exchanges, there was DTCC, and all of that had been created. And again, I don't want to go through every piece of it, but asset managers work with all of these systems that across. And the idea was, how do I reduce my risk? How do I reduce risks in different places? Whether it's settlement risk, it's liquidity risk, it's a risk of not getting delivered. So this was the market that used to exist, and it functions well. It has been developed over the last 50 years. putting all the market participants, the regulators, all of them have worked together to make this a reality. And it works. But if we go to the next slide, and this slide is actually very important, and it's a little hard to read, I'll send it across to everybody. But when we add the private or the alternative asset managers into this, all of these systems start breaking down. And they break down in a very, very big way. And if you go to the next slide, why do they break down? Because the markets, in the private markets, there's not an exchange. So there are no risks. So all the risks that the asset manager had been taken away from the asset manager has come back to that asset manager. The risk of whether I want to trade with somebody, I don't know whether what he's trading, whether I am getting the right pricing, whether I know that it'll settle. So we are the risks have improved, have gone up by 100-fold in this new market, and that is the systems have not been developed or generated, the processes have not been created to manage some of those risks. And that's the biggest area of development going on today, which is the asset tech sector. So I wanted to introduce that sector itself as a subsector within the whole fintech asset class. And if we go to the next slide, and some of this, again, we know all of this. We have seen all of this happening at many points of time. But it just goes to show that the market itself it's a complex market. If there is no transparency, it creates a lot of challenges. I mean, Allianz is happening as we speak. It's $6 billion in fines. I mean, that's one of the biggest fines that has been levied. They were running strategies where they were pricing everything, which was totally. Actually, they were pretty much fudging everything on their books. If you go to the next slide, and regulators are coming into the market. So asset managers themselves need to be able to sustain and to provide the specific informations that they are looking for. And in private market, that information is not there with anybody else but with the asset manager. And so he needs the systems. If you go to the next slide again, all of this are more internal structures. But we were, Steve, you spoke about SPACs, and there are all kinds of these instruments that have been created, and they are complex. They are very complex. Most of us will take quite some time to understand all that. And then how do we think that the asset managers who are going to be running this should be running it? And that's where the asset tech sector is going to be really critical and important. We go to the next slide, and actually I'll stop with the next one. I'll stop with this. This is an ugly slide. I don't understand it. Mark said the first thing he said was, take the slide off. But I actually wanted to show it because
he doesn't care what I say.
It is chaotic.
Clearly.
Yeah, it is extremely chaotic, and nobody, if you're not in it, you don't understand it, and then how do you invest with that asset manager? And that's the problem that we are solving at that. I can stop at that.
Come join our 361 firm community of investors and thought leaders. We have a lot of events created by the community as we collaborate on investments and philanthropic interests. Join us.